Hi everyone, my name is Gloria and welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in October. I was going to do another quarterly wrap-up where I talked about October, November, and December, but I read so many books that I thought it'd make more sense if I broke it up month by month. In October, I read 11 books. I'm going to be looking at my Goodreads, which shows the books that I read and what I rated them. The very first book I read in October was Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng. This is a literary fiction novel about a Chinese-American family in the 1970s living in a small town in Ohio, and the favorite daughter just out of nowhere dies. This story follows how this family unravels, particularly the parents' relationship. It goes back in time to tell how they met and the circumstances that led them to where they are today and all the different interactions. And you could tell that there's just brokenness in this family and a lot of untold things and secrets kept from each other, and all of that is brought to the surface with this tragedy that happens. I gave this book 3 stars. I really enjoyed reading it and I liked it. I wouldn't say that it's a favorite of mine, but I did get something out of the book. The next book that I actually listened to on Libby was The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. This book is an adult fantasy and it follows a man who returns to his hometown and remembers certain events that happened to him in his childhood, particularly magical events, and there is certain characters who are these basically like witches, and then there's this evil housekeeper that entered his family who turns out to be this demon spirit from another world. I had no idea what this was going into it, except that this was a very highly rated book. I gave this a 1 star because this was way too creepy and too weird for me. I will say the writing was really well done and the narration was also really well done. It was narrated by Neil Gaiman himself. So the writing was great, but the plot and the story was way too weird for me. I think it's beyond me. I'm not that much into fantasy. I mean, I barely dipped my toes in. So this was probably, I don't recommend if you're not a big fantasy reader and you're not familiar with it, because this is just, it was too strange for me. I also didn't know much about Neil Gaiman until I read the book, and I realized he also wrote Coraline, which is a children's fantasy story, which you might be familiar with because there's a popular movie about it. I actually watched the movie a few years ago with some friends, and also was way too weird for me, so I should have correlated the two and probably not read this book. But the book was super short. It was only like a 5-hour audio listen, so I just pushed my way through it. If you're into that genre of fantasy and weirdness and creepiness, probably you would enjoy it, but this was just not for me, and I probably won't be reading any Neil Gaiman. Nothing against him, just not my cup of tea. The next book that I listened to in October was The Secret of the Old Clock by Carolyn Keene. This is the first book in the Nancy Drew mystery stories. My friend and I are really big fans of Nancy Drew, and we actually grew up and still play some of the Nancy Drew detective online computer games. This is a super short 3-hour listen on audio. It's a children's story. It's quite nostalgic to read it because I remember reading them as a kid. I gave it a 3-star because I really liked it. It just wasn't long enough for me to really dive in, but that's kind of the essence of the Nancy Drew stories. So nothing against them. I liked it, and I would recommend listening to the Nancy Drew books because they're kind of fun and a quick listen. From there, I read Cersei by Madeline Miller. This is a Greek retelling of the goddess Cersei, who was an outcast and exiled to an island. This follows her life and all the different adventures and events that happen in her life, which spans thousands of years. This was highly recommended from a lot of people, and I understand why people enjoy the story. I, though, gave it 2 stars. I thought it was just okay. There's definitely certain things that I liked about the book, but overall I was just bored and I was sort of waiting for it to be over. It wasn't for me. Next, I listened to Talking as Fast as I Can, From Gilmore Girls to Gilmore Girls and Everything in Between by Lauren Graham. This is a memoir of sorts, and I listened to the audiobook narrated by her. I'm a big Gilmore Girls fan. I rewatched the series a few years back. My camera cut out, but I was talking about Talking as Fast as I Can. This book is about Lauren Graham's story and life, particularly while filming Gilmore Girls. And if you're a Gilmore Girls fan, I would recommend this book. I gave it 4 stars. It was a really fun listen, but if you're not familiar with Gilmore Girls, I probably wouldn't find much out of this book. The next book that I read in October is Into the Water by Paula Hawkins. This is the same author that wrote The Girl on the Train, which is a mystery thriller book that I read a few years back, and I liked it. I mentioned this book in my book haul. I saw this at Goodwill for $2 and was familiar with the author, and I like mystery and thrillers, so I thought I would pick this up. And I actually was participating in the Hey Reader-a-thon by Chantel and Intentional Life, and one of the prompts in the readathon was read a book with the word water in it. So this was perfect, and I picked it up and I read this in about a week. This book follows a woman who was either killed or committed suicide by drowning in a lake in this small town in England, and several other women have died in similar ways in the past. And this follows multiple perspectives and multiple timelines. It sort of jumps back and forth. You don't really know what's going on. I gave this book a 3-star. I did like it. It wasn't my favorite thriller. It was sort of a slow burn for me. It wasn't as fast-paced as I would have liked it, and some of the characters were a little weird for me. Next, for the readathon, I also read If I Run by Terry Blackstock. This is a Christian fiction mystery suspense. This was recommended by Chantel and Intentional Life. It's one of her favorite books, and it followed a few prompts in the readathon, which is first book in a series of recommended book and a book with 3 words in the title. So it sort of fit all 3 prompts. This book follows a girl named Casey whose DNA is all over a crime scene from one of her best friends. So she decides to go on the run, and there is a corrupt police force in this small town where this murders happen, and they're pinning this on her, so she's running away because she's overwhelmed with, you know, the forces of the police department who are trying to catch her. And then it follows another person who is an ex-military who's suffering with PTSD, who is hired to find this girl. And I would give it a 2.5. I thought it was okay / I sort of liked it. There are some parts of this book that were interesting, but mostly I had a lot of issues with the plot line. It just was very unrealistic to me. This very young girl who has 0 experience of running away just happens to know how to get a fake ID and like be hidden from police and all of these things, and she keeps mentioning that, oh, she learned this because she watched the series 24 on Fox or whatever, and I'm like, you wouldn't be able to get away with that kind of stuff. There were definitely just parts that were totally unbelievable for me, which is what kind of dampened the rating a bit. I don't plan on continuing this series though. From there, I actually have a cookbook that I sort of read in October, but I'm considering it read because I did read the introduction and foreword and look through the entire book, look through all of the recipes, put little tabs on all of the ones that I'm excited to cook. I got this book for my birthday from dear friends of ours. This is 6 Seasons, A New Way with Vegetables by Joshua McFadden. This isn't necessarily a vegetarian cookbook, but it's heavily focused on vegetables, and particularly seasonal vegetables and how to cook within the season. And there's some delicious recipes in here. I already have a favorite kale salad that is absolutely wonderful. The 6 seasons are spring, early summer, midsummer, late summer, fall, and winter. And it talks about all of the vegetables that are in season during that time. This is a beautiful cookbook, well written, great instructions, beautiful photos, and I'm very excited to grow my cookbook collection, and I'm glad that this is one of the first ones that are on my shelves. Next, I read Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. This book follows a pandemic that happens all over the world and causes the collapse of civilization. Relatable? Yes. This was very recommended by a lot of people on BookTube, and it was on my to-be-read list. I would call this book somewhat dystopian. I think it's classified as sci-fi, but I would not call it sci-fi. It follows several characters, multiple perspectives, multiple timelines, but the main characters are a group of wandering artists who perform plays and concerts for all these different little towns that have established themselves 20 years past when the collapse happened. And then at one point, this caravan of travelers gets separated and they try to make their way to a safe haven, which is this airport that is known to have people who have survived from the beginning. I gave this book 5 stars. I found it very interesting, very unique and compelling. I really, really enjoyed it, and I would highly recommend. I thought that the way that all these different characters who seemingly have no connection are interconnected over time in this book, and I really like books that have multiple perspectives, and I really really enjoyed it. So highly recommend. The next book that I listened to was Becoming by Michelle Obama. This is her memoir and her life story. What a wonderful book. I gave it 5 stars. Absolutely loved it. She's really eloquent. I have so much respect for this woman and all of the things that she accomplished. It tells a lot of her story, her background, her growing up, and then how she met Barack Obama and their life and their marriage, and then the years in office and what she tried to accomplish there. This was such a good memoir. Really loved it. Highly recommend. Next was The Toll by Neil Shusterman. I talked about the series in my last wrap up. I read Scythe and The Thunderhead, and this is the last book in the series. This is a young adult dystopian series similar to Divergent, Hunger Games, Maze Runner kind of stuff. But the series in general follows a world where they've defeated death, and in order to maintain population control, there is a group of people who are established in society called the Scythes, who are allowed to kill people in honorable and unbiased ways. And it follows many different characters involved in this society, but the society breaks down because, of course, there's corruption in this supposed to be perfect world, and then there's certain people who are kind of called to save it. There's definitely certain things that were very interesting about the series, and I enjoyed it, and I would recommend. It's definitely up there with, you know, Hunger Games and Divergent and stuff. I enjoyed both of those, and if you're at all interested in stuff like that, I would recommend this one because I thought it was great. And finally, the last book that I read in October was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid. This is a debut novel that came out this year. It follows the main character, Amira, who is Black and works for a rich white American family in Pennsylvania. And what really caught my attention in this book is that it starts with her going to a grocery store with the girl that she's nannying, and she's confronted by a security officer in this grocery store basically saying that she's kidnapped this girl because she's Black and the girl is white, and this is a fancy part of town, and apparently that just doesn't happen. And she stands up for herself. And that was really the hook that got me interested in this story because I found it very compelling. The rest of the story follows the relationship between Amira and her employer, who is this rich white lady, and then also her relationship with her friends, and particularly with a white male that she is dating and how their story unfolds. I found that this book had very interesting topics, particularly between mixed race relationships and kind of the motives of why particularly these white people want to have Amira in their life, almost for like cool status of, hey, I have this Black friend, or I have this Black employee, look how great I am. There were definitely certain twists and things that came up that I didn't see coming, and I really liked. I found that the way this book was written was quite complex. I gave it 4 stars. Really, really enjoyed it. And that is all the books that I read in October. Thank you so much for watching this October wrap up. Stay tuned for November wrap up coming up soon. Bye!